This is the Chain of Rocks, and this, the Chain of Rocks Bypass, a canal that opened river traffic and led to the opening of this busy port 60 years ago. Most of us come to the zoo to see this, but a few people head to the library to learn about animals and the history of this St. Louis institution. And if you wonder what the Notre Dame Cathedral might look like during restoration, go back a few years to see what it took to bring back the Rock Church after its fire. It's all next on Living St. Louis. We were exploring some river stories when the river came up to meet us. Spring flooding was sending people in river towns scrambling to sandbag or evacuate, and the Mississippi rose so high that barge traffic was shut down. Nothing but logs and other debris going by the arch for a while. And that's big because, as we were finding out, the river, the reason St. Louis is here in the first place, is still a story, even when it's not flooding. I'm Jim Kircher, and this is the Chain of Rocks Canal. It's a place I've always been curious about, wanted to know more about. It's an important part of the regional economy, an important part of the national transportation system. Because before they built the Chain of Rocks Canal, river traffic had to deal with, well, a chain of rocks. We know that place best now from the Chain of Rocks Bridge and the castle-like water intake structures. But in the entire length of the Mississippi River, this was the only place where there were rapids. Not big whitewater rapids, but rapids nonetheless, water flowing over rocks. That's not exactly what you see here anymore. Water is now flowing over what is officially known as Dam number 27. It was built not to help get boats through the Chain of Rocks, but around the Chain of Rocks. It helped raise the water level that filled this canal and made possible the next place we're going to visit. And if you like trains and trucks and barges, you can't do any better than America's central port. And when you're here, it really hits home. St. Louis, it's still a river city. Actually, this is Granite City, Illinois. But what goes on here is a part of the regional economy and part of our regional history. This port, which changed its name a few years ago from Tri-Cities to America's Central Port, has been in business now for 60 years, since 1959. There also used to be here the Granite City Army Depot off Route 3, but the port, which is a public facility, took over that land, and it's expanded. And it's about much more than loading and unloading. While the Port Administration has just 35 employees, there are some 800 other people working for the companies operating here. Dennis Wilmsmeyer, a Granite City native, is the port's executive director.
You know, our focus as a public port district in the state of Illinois, we're here to create jobs. We basically are an economic development entity that's located on a river system with a lot of great transportation opportunities.
Frank Papa is the port's sales manager.
I mean, we're getting a good diversity of tenants here now. Again, we're focusing on manufacturing and getting those type of business
here.
Yes.
You might think it's just a place to warehouse stuff, to store it up and stack it up. But that doesn't employ that many people. What they want here are places that use materials to make things. Bring the material in, ship product out. Petroleum to turn into asphalt, chemicals into fertilizer, and steel into, well, steel stuff. Does this go 24 hours?
24 hours a day.
Yeah. So if I came down here in the middle of the night, if the water wasn't high, there'd be stuff going on?
There'd be activity going on here, yes.
Yeah.
You have the river system here that remains ice-free, does not freeze over like it does up north of here. We have the end of the lock and dam system here, so really from St. Louis southward, we are free-flowing river all the way down to New Orleans. You've got the railroads, 6 of the 7 Class 1 railroads that still come to St. Louis. We are the western termination of the eastern railroads and the eastern termination of the western railroads. So it becomes this great point here collection point, if you will, of all the traffic, both rail and barge.
It's not just geography, but geology that plays a role here. And that brings us back to the Chain of Rocks. This unique feature on the Mississippi River is caused by what's called an anticline. This is what it looks like when it's above ground. Rock is squeezed and folded and pushed up. At the river, the bedrock has been forced to the surface and the river flows over the top, unable so far to erode a deep channel. Before the small dam was built, the water level here could get so low that you could drive from the water plant on the St. Louis side out to the water intake structures. Go back in our history and it was a place that was a barrier to river traffic during low water. In the 1930s, the Army Corps of Engineers began to control river levels with locks and dams to improve barge traffic. But the Chain of Rocks needed a special solution. You still couldn't float over it year-round, you couldn't dredge it, and blasting through was not a realistic solution.
So they got very creative, created an 8-mile-long Chain of Rocks Canal with levees on both sides of that to, this man-made canal. They put the whole lock system, that elevator system.
But even the canal needed help getting the water deep enough, so they dumped a lot of rocks at the Chain of Rocks to create a low-water dam, number 27, raising the river up to help fill the canal. The canal project, the Chain of Rocks bypass, was completed in the early 1950s, and it included a very important feature, a wider section that allowed for the development of port facilities. Here, they just call it the notch.
The lock and dam is down here at the end, and here is the notch. So the barges, they get pushed in sideways.
This notch is how long then?
About a mile, approximately
a mile. That's a big notch.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, but that's what allows the barges to kind of pull off to the side.
Right.
Be loaded, unloaded.
Right, and here we have oil products, we have fertilizer, we have steel coils, okay, and we have grain that comes over the property also.
Yeah.
So today, agricultural products, primarily corn and soybeans, but also meals, corn meals and that sort of thing, handled a lot through the harbor facilities here. About 60% of what we handle today, about that 3 million tons, is agriculture or agricultural related products. So tariffs associated with that, certainly, it makes a big dent in what we do here in our business.
A lot of that stuff is going to other places in the world.
Absolutely. So 100% of what comes in here today by agricultural products, by rail or truck, goes to barge, and that goes downriver and then is exported to other countries. So we are definitely at the nexus right here in terms of the funnel, if you will, bringing those products and commodities here and getting them to the world.
What are your concerns? I mean, you want to talk about how great things are and how many jobs there are here, but there's a lot of things in the world, there's a lot of things in the region that affect what's going on here. What worries you?
Absolutely, and it's not so much worries. I think with the river industry, you get floods, you get droughts, the river industry and all the barge transportation companies, and we have become pretty resilient to the ups and downs of the rivers, whether that's a flood, whether that's a drought. It does impact that product movement, and it's something that you really, unfortunately, can't forecast too well. The other thing today is tariffs. So that's another one that just, we really try to push as much as we can from a barge transportation perspective. But tariffs out there in the industry, or the threat of tariffs, really affect the types of commodities and the amount of commodities we can move on the river system. But we are definitely here and invest a lot in the property from a transportation perspective in order that we can bring companies in here that can take advantage of that transportation opportunity.
Yeah, geography still makes a difference.
Yes, it does. Location, location, location.
Before we leave this topic, I wanted to give a little more information about that film clip we used, archival stuff of Mississippi River steamboats, because it has its own story, although it took a little bit of digging to find it. It's one of the fun things about doing history programs, ordering film from the National Archives. Not just getting what you asked for, but getting everything else on the reel. And that's how we came across these unlabeled scenes. Now, it's always handy to have riverboat footage in this town, but the next shot? The Eads Bridge. Hey, this is our town. Now we really have questions, because you don't film this sort of thing for nothing. And clearly, there were some well-dressed gentlemen on board who were not part of the crew. And this guy with the mutton chops, he gets a close-up. It took some time, and the internet, to figure this one out. The obvious place to start was with the steamboat Nokomis. It belonged to the Mississippi River Commission, tasked with improving the river from Minnesota to New Orleans. This towboat was brought to St. Louis in 1916. The following year, October 1917, it helped mark the reopening of navigation from St. Louis to St. Paul. This was a big deal. Coal was going north, iron ore was coming south to St. Louis steel mills, freeing up railroad cars and Great Lakes steamers for wartime duty. Once we nailed down the date, the newspaper reports filled in the details. Those important guys? Officials from Minneapolis, St. Paul, and St. Louis, including Mayor Keel. And the guest of honor? This man, Secretary of Commerce William Cox Redfield. That's the Secretary of Commerce's flag flying on the towboat. Other boats blew their whistles as he passed. Now, this was years before the lock and dam system was built. The papers reported that the Nokomis was going to meet up with another boat in Alton, but because of low water, it got stuck and didn't make it. We spend a lot of time on Living St. Louis exploring, often going to places we've never been before, maybe never heard about. But we also go places that, well, we're all sort of familiar with, but look for things behind the scenes, like what Heidi Glaus found at the St. Louis Zoo.
The St. Louis Zoo is home to hundreds of amazing animals, but at last check, not one of them can read, which is what makes Jill Gordon's job a bit unusual.
Most people don't know that the zoo has a library.
She's the zoo librarian,
We probably have around 6,000 volumes now.
a post she's held since this kind of hidden library opened in 1989.
Most of the books are here in this space, but we have satellite collections at the veterinary hospital. Most of the veterinary books are up there. And then our nutrition center has a collection of books.
It is an invaluable resource for the keepers and staff.
Well, the main purpose of the zoo library is to support our education, conservation, and research staff.
What kind of things do they want to know?
Maybe we've got a new animal that needs to be introduced into a group of animals, and they're looking for, there might be other zoos that have written articles about, introducing meerkats into a group or something like that.
Name an animal, and Jill can probably pull out a book about it.
It's an antelope called a diker, and somebody has spent their whole life, I guess, making this book.
This is also a place that's open to the public by appointment.
We do get a lot of questions about zoo history, and then we also have people that are wanting to identify something that they saw in their yard.
And Jill can answer both.
We use our Missouri Department of Conservation publication on amphibians and reptiles of Missouri a lot.
The more unique items are kept behind locked doors.
This is where we have some of the guidebooks from the early days of the zoo.
This leather-bound book was printed in 1926.
So you can see things were very different back then. That's one of the food stands. Those are people gathered around our old sea lion basin.
There are pictures of the original elephant house and quite possibly the most popular animal to ever call the St. Louis Zoo home.
People ask about Phil all the time. We had giant pandas here from 1939 to 1952. So this was Happy and Bao Bay.
There are old postcards in pristine shape.
This is a postcard set from 1944.
And boxes of early zoo documents, including a Miss Jim certificate.
The school children collected pennies, and they were used to purchase our first elephant, Miss Jim.
Now, what makes this a true St. Louis treasure is that beyond the books, there's something called Suitcases, which are a great resource for teachers.
They have things like books, videos, puppets, models. Some of our kits have what we call biofacts, which are the animal artifacts like a skull or a turtle shell.
Cases even include activity sheets for the students.
It makes it easy for teachers. We have everything, pulled together already.
All they have to do is reserve it and pick it up.
This is our Arctic wildlife suitcase. We have a lot of pictures of different Arctic animals. We also have a packet of pictures of our own polar bear cully.
Some containers even have puppets and puppet show scripts.
There's a walrus.
So it might be one of the smallest libraries in St. Louis, but its impact is big.
I feel so privileged to work with all the keepers and vets and researchers who are doing such great work and are so dedicated to caring for the zoo animals.
Finally, the fire at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris brought back memories of a church fire here in St. Louis. It was in 2007 when lightning struck the historic St. Alphonsus, the rock church here on North Grand. And we were able to follow, bringing it back, the repairs, the restoration. Certainly not on the scale of what will be needed at Notre Dame, but still, it took a lot of time and money and old world craftsmanship.
It was a rainy Palm Sunday morning, but it was a joyous procession at St. Alphonsus, the rock church. For more than a year and a half, they had been holding services in the gymnasium. And this morning, they were marching back. Their historic church repaired, recovered, restored. That has been quite a story that began on another rainy day in August of 2007. A storm moved through St. Louis that evening, and lightning struck the church, setting the roof on fire. Although firemen were able to save the 140-year-old church, the fire and all the water needed to put it out had done millions of dollars worth of damage. All this on Father Matthew Bonk's first day on the job.
Well, I actually was unpacking. I had arrived the day before and just was taking books and things out of the boxes and then kind of moving into my room. And one of the priests, I heard him say, "There's a fire, there's a fire." Well, certainly I was not prepared for it.
This was the church he had come to serve, with its bright, colorful sanctuary and soaring vaulted ceiling. This is what it looked like after the fire. In places, the ceiling and the roof above it opened to the sky, with far more damage unseen. And this is what it looked like 8 months later.
The main damage was the roof. The fire started behind the steeple, and that's what got struck.
Right.
And that burned a huge hole there. It spread to the south, in the south transept, and west down the main part of the roof.
Jeff Myers of Wachter Construction is the project superintendent. He and retired Rock Church priest Kyle Fisher took us up to see how things were coming along. Fixing the roof and the extensively damaged plaster ceiling is a huge job, and it all started by putting up the scaffolding. If there was anything good about this fire, it was that the stained glass windows all survived, and the altar and other marble work undamaged. After covering all of that and raising the scaffolding, the first job was to give the church a new roof, and not just shingles and such, but the whole top section of the rock church had to be rebuilt, and few will ever see the work they did here.
The main trusses, they were all burnt, all destroyed, and we replaced all of those. It's all Douglas fir, number 2. The original stuff you could see was actually hand-hewn with a hatchet in places. To be honest with you, I've actually grown fond of the place, because it's a once-in-a-lifetime job.
When the church had a roof, it was then time to work on the vaulted ceiling, which is made up of wood and plaster, all of it curving and bending, and damaged by water, fire, and smoke.
This was what was left. The wood framing,
Right.
all the square nails, and then the plaster was over that.
Right.
And this is a brown coat. I mean, this was all that was left. This was all put back recently.
Right. And this was through.
Yes, through.
Right, yeah.
You can see the sky.
When the framing is repaired, the plasterers step in to do their work in very much the same way it was done in the 1800s. This is a big job, and there really aren't all that many people who do this sort of thing. Jack Shipley came out of retirement and was helping to rebuild one of the decorative medallions.
Make rubber molds of it, and cast it, put it back together, and
You've done this kind of restoration,
Oh,
anything
sure.
this big on this big of a project?
Fox Theater, Powell Hall, that was when I was younger. Post office, downtown. There was a lot of ornamental work in there.
8 months after the fire, there were still places that had hardly been touched, but there was a section that was starting to look good as new. And that's encouraging for parishioners who can't wait to get back in here. Since the fire, when they come for services, they head for the gymnasium.
It's coming along, but it's a slow process. But we're going to be better for it.
It's just a minor inconvenience. The church was saved and we can rebuild, so we'll do what we have to do.
The thing about the Rock Church isn't just that it's old, but that it is very much alive. It is now a predominantly African-American Catholic church with white members as well. Many worshipers come from throughout the area. It is a church that has already gone through tough times, already been remade and rebuilt as a congregation. Father Kyle Fisher was at the church in the 60s and 70s when St. Louis's population, especially its white population, dramatically declined, and the Rock Church's membership dropped to barely 100.
Yeah, that was my goal at that time, to keep the church alive and open.
If the fire had come back then, you guys wouldn't have been able to redo this.
No, we wouldn't have.
The project itself is going to run into the, probably $6 or $7 million. And so, the fact that a lot of this is going to be covered by the fire insurance gives us at least certainly a big boost.
And you could have never afforded to do this if there hadn't been a fire anyway.
Oh, absolutely.
So you're going to end up with a stronger steeple, no doubt.
That's right.
A full tour of the Rock Church work site requires a long climb up the outside of the steeple, which is its own kind of project. There was some damage to the bell ringing mechanisms. They've been fixed and the bells are ringing again. And some of the decorative window tracery had to be replaced. But the real concerns weren't so obvious. During the fire, the steeple, which was added to the church in 1893, served as a chimney. And it's possible the heat may have weakened the stone and mortar structure. But none of that could really be addressed until the scaffolding crew finished its job. And what a job it is. Most of the members of this crew from Gedeke Scaffolding have been doing this sort of thing for more than 20 years.
And we do it the safest way that we can possibly do it without anybody getting hurt.
That's it. That's the name of the game.
Want everybody to come back in the same condition they came in with. So.
Right, put in another couple of years.
Yeah.
You have to have people up there you trust, that you've worked with to get, then you know each other's moves. That's the thing, being comfortable with the fellas that you're working with.
Even for these guys, with all their experience, this is a special job. They don't work on a lot of steeples, but they also know they are working on a piece of history. But that's one of the problems as well. The scaffolding is supported by brackets anchored to the stonework, and they are finding that the mortar is crumbling away in places.
Well, the biggest danger on this job is where we drill into the stone. We have to make sure that the mortar joints are strong enough to contain to hold our anchors. And if the anchors don't hold, if the stone comes out, the scaffold comes down with it.
The work on the Rock Church roof and steeple would be completed. And the church building ended up better, even stronger than before. But inside, the scaffolding would stay up a lot longer, and it was worth the wait.
come a long way.
Yeah. How long have you been on this job?
20 months.
And you got a week left?
Yeah. They're going to have their first service this Sunday.
Yeah. Well, it looks amazing. You got to be pleased with it. I know you're living with it every day, so maybe you don't notice it. But
although I do, it's a beautiful, beautiful building.
Yeah,
it really is.
At this point, it looked like they were just freshening up the place, painting here, cleaning there. You'd never know what had gone into getting the soaring vaulted ceiling looking like this again, or what this mosaic had been through.
Yeah, there again, water damage. It, I guess, came down inside the wall and blew these two panels out onto the floor and broke them into pieces. And there again, the marble guys, the craftsmen they are, put it back together and reset them. And they actually had to replace some of the little red tiles.
Yeah.
It's a testament to the skilled craftsmen in St. Louis. I mean, it all went very good. The new plaster, the new paint. There's not much that we haven't touched.
Right. There's a lot of stuff here we don't see that you address.
Correct.
Right?
Correct. Down in the tunnels, all the way to the tip top of the steeple, inside and out. It should be good for another 140 years.
And that's tonight's Living St. Louis. Thanks for joining us. I'm Jim Kircher, and we'll see you next time.
Living St. Louis is made possible by the support of the Mary Rankin Jordan and Eddie A. Jordan Charitable Foundation and by the members of 9 Network.